I'm going to argue that The Buffalo Hunter is one part Interview with a Vampire with a healthy dose of American Gods. Please join the conversation. Hey everybody, welcome to D3 Reads. It's Eric, and today we're going to take a close look at Stephen Graham Jones' historic horror novel, The Buffalo Hunter. Now, if you are a returning viewer, thanks so much for coming back. We're glad you're here. Thanks for subscribing. You may remember that I've been talking about this book now for several weeks. It was part of my spooky season roll-up, and I've just now finished it, and I'm real excited to give a good spoiler-free review for you. Now, if you're new to the channel, we take a look at science fiction, horror, and fantasy novels, and we'd love for you to subscribe and join this conversation. We have really good discussions in the comments of these videos, and I welcome you to join and let me know your thoughts and suggestions and what you're reading, all that kind of good stuff, because we love books here. But like I said, today we are going to talk specifically about The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. If you've watched any of my more recent videos, you may realize I kept dropping Hunter, the second Hunter, off the title. I don't know why, just my brain. But this book has been making waves since it was published earlier this year. Matter of fact, I think it was on Blue Sky, that Time magazine lists The Buffalo Hunter as one of the top 100 books for 2025 that you should read. So congratulations to you, Stephen Graham Jones. It's quite an honor. So I've been excited to read this book since I first came across it. And because I've pointed out many times now that I am quite a fan of vampire stories, and I was just desperate for a really good, newer vampire story. So we're going to go over this against a spoiler-free review. I want to tell you kind of an overarching description of the plot and the characters. I'm not going to give away anything at all that could ruin this experience for you, I promise. And then we'll go into what works and what doesn't work really, and our overall take on this book, okay? So before we get started, though, again, if you haven't yet, please subscribe. If you could, give me a comment on what your favorite vampire novel is, okay? All right, so let's jump into it. I've only read one other Stephen Graham Jones novel, which was The Only Good Indians, and I really, really loved it. And what I find is, in that novel and this one, that Jones does a masterful job of telling a complicated, layered story. So the plot of this starts, and it's kind of encapsulated in a modern setting. I think it's 2012, where we are introduced to a professor named Etsy Carney. And Etsy is a professor who is working on trying to get her tenure, and she lucks out because it just so happens that at the university, somewhere near where she is working on her project to present to try to earn her tenureship, she is given a journal that was discovered in an old house. I forget what the construction site was going on, but basically in this rundown house, in the wall, a journal is found. And the journal was written by none other than her great-great-great-grandfather, Arthur Carney. And the thing about him is that he was a Lutheran minister who just vanished at some point. And kind of a mystery. So this is her chance to, one, transcribe this journal and possibly use it to present to whatever committee that you present to when you're trying to get your tenureship and trying to, I guess, get published and that kind of thing. And also solve the mystery of what happened to her, her descendant. Or her ancestor, rather. That's the first part of the story, we've got a mystery. What happened to this Lutheran minister, Arthur Carney? And it transitions into that story. But it's not just the journal of this pastor, because what we find is Arthur Carney was a Lutheran minister, and the journal was written in 1912, and he is set up shop, if you will. His flock is in this town in Montana called Miles City. Now, Montana in 1912 is not far removed from the Wild West days when Montana was a territory, and the fighting between American settlers and the indigenous people, the American Indians, was still a thing. And so America is beginning to kind of move past that era, but some things just you can't forget. And so Burkarni is focused on leading his flock in this kind of, it's not a frontier town because Montana is now a state, but still it's not far removed from the frontier. And one day he's giving a sermon, and in comes an American Indian, a Native American, who sits in the back of the church, and that is his first sighting of a character who has many names, but his adult name, if you will, is Good Stab. And this is where things turn dark. Good Stab gets his attention and says to him after the service that he wants to give him a confession. And so thus begins the next layer of the story. So we have the pastor, Arthur, who is writing down his observations of what's going on in Miles City. And at the same time, we're getting the story of Good Stab, where he tells his tale that is a tragic and horrifying story. Now, in what's also going on as this is happening is there have been these murders, these gruesome murders that have been occurring just around Miles City, where these people are being stripped of their skin. Really, truly horrific. And so obviously all these are going to wind up being connected. But Arthur and Good Stab then begin this back and forth of telling their story and reacting to it, and it's a dark, tragic story on a number of different levels. But I really love the way that this kind of plays out. We work our way through this developed relationship between Good Stab and Arthur, and then it ultimately climaxes in the modern day story. So it's just a really well-told tale. Now, there are times in the story that I did struggle a little bit because the character Good Stab, who grew up during the frontier time, he tells stories using a lot of Native American kind of style descriptors, old-fashioned, archaic kind. So a lot of animals, for instance, aren't going to be referred to as buffalo; they're called blackheads, and dirty faces are mice and things like that. And sometimes you got to kind of figure out what it is he's talking about, but I think it adds to the richness of the story. It didn't slow it down for me, though some folks might not particularly care for that. But again, as you work your way through this relationship and things become more and more dire and grim and horrifying, I just really think that the story worked so well. So that's kind of like the big picture of the plot. Let me go into what I loved about this. Number one is Good Stab. Good Stab's story, as I said, it's the heart of this book. It was fantastic. It's tragic on the horror side of things, but as well as on the context of the very real violence that drives a lot of his motivation that occurred against Native Americans during the United States' expansion across the continent. And I think some folks might not particularly care for that, but this is a thought-provoking book, and it's unapologetic. It faces a lot of the brutality that was inflicted on Native Americans during this time, and it is a powerful motivator for the characters in this book. So even though you have a truly horrific, evil entity here, the vampirism that we're dealing with, there's a lot of complexity to the characters here. There's no good guy, bad guy type thing. This is a truly kind of engaging kind of horror story that I just found really, really fascinating. So Good Stab, his story, and how he came to be where he is and what he's trying to do throughout the story, I think it was the absolute, it's the core of the story and well worth your time. What I didn't care for quite so much is the other characters that surround Good Stab. The pastor somebody put a comment when I first brought up on this channel that I was reading this, someone pointed out that they thought that the pastor was annoying, and I totally get that. I don't know that, maybe it was on purpose, but I felt like Stephen Graham Jones didn't quite land it when he was creating the foil to be engaged against the darkness in the story, because you see a lot of, I think, distracting elements about this. It's not just a complex character, but he talks a lot about his food and his eating, and I think there's something to be meant there that maybe I'm not quite smart enough to figure out, but it was distracting to me. You didn't get the sense sometimes, or I didn't get the sense sometimes, that given what was going on, that it was being taken too seriously. And the same goes for the more modern story of this. And I'll just throw this out there. I've alluded to this in previous horror review videos, but more often than not, I get disappointed to some degree. Not like ruins it for me, but I get disappointed in the resolution of a horror story, because once the big reveal happens, once you're dealing head on 2/3 of the way of the book through, or what have you, you've got to figure out how to resolve the story. And more often than not, it's a little bit of a letdown, because you've got the character who's got to somehow, the characters have to somehow end here. And does the author, in doing so, either give you too much information or make some decisions on what the creatures or the way to defeat the creatures? Is it too mundane or what? So a lot of times it's a little disappointing. In this case, I didn't find the ending disappointing, but there's a chunk of the resolution that just didn't land very much for me. And I'm not going to dwell on that, but it did kind of suck some of the excitement that I had throughout most of this book away just a little bit. And I'll just leave it at that. The characters around Goodstep just aren't as interesting, and I wasn't as invested in them as I feel like I should have been. That would have made this book like a complete runaway 5-star type story. So where I ultimately landed on this, if I were to rate this on a 5-star scale, and I still haven't I've been revisiting how I rate these books. If you're talking on a 1 to 5 scale, and I've seen a lot of 5-star reviews, I think on Goodreads it averages out to a 4-star. I think I'm leaning more on the 4-star side of things here. If you want a good, dark vampire story, and the vampires in here, they are traditional in a lot of sense. Stephen Graham Jones does a masterful job. One of the things I look for in these is that the vampire has to be alien, horrifying, and mysterious. You can't understand everything about the vampire. That's one of the reasons why I didn't like Anne Rice's Queen of the Damned. I felt like she turned the vampire into a clinical creature, something that you knew way more about than we should have. In this case, there's a lot of mystery around the vampire and what drives it and what powers it, where it comes from, but it gives you enough to where you feel like you understand this. And he does customize it a bit. That you get the sense that there is a Native American mythology kind of woven into this, and I really like it. For instance, his vampires, they take on some of the features of what it is they're feeding on. And so the vampire, if they feed on Indians, they're going to look and act more Indian. If they feed on the white settlers, they're going to start taking on characteristics of that, which I thought was a really neat part of kind of addition to the vampire lore. So from a horror perspective, I loved it. From a character perspective, the story of the Native Americans and Goodstep in particular, I thought was just really fascinating. I felt there was a little bit of weakness in the beginning and the end with the non-Goodstep characters, but still, overall, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're looking for a good vampire story to sink your teeth into. You see what I did there? Okay, guys, that's it. That's my take on The Buffalo Hunter Hunter. If you've read it, please let me know what you thought. As always, if you decide to drop a comment, please keep it spoiler-free so folks who haven't read it yet don't have anything ruined. And if you feel like you have to put a spoiler in there, just put a big spoiler banner right in the front of the comment so folks know to avoid it. Thanks so much for your time, guys. I'm getting ready to transition over into some military science fiction, maybe some space opera as well. So if you have any good suggestions on military sci-fi that I haven't covered yet, please drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear. Thanks so much for your time, guys. Have a great day.